As usual, please don't take any recordings, screenshots, or photos of the call without the express permission of the AGJC. You can check out the recordings of previous calls on the AGJC YouTube channel. And with that out the way, Ariella, please take us away.
Thank you so much, Jake. Welcome to the AGJC's weekly pre-Shabbat Zoom. Hood has a meeting which is running over, so she's asked me to step in for today's introduction. First and foremost, a mazal tov to Benjy on the birth of his new baby boy. So mazal tov from all of us. When we talk about the Abraham Accords, we often focus on the business opportunities, economic benefits, cultural exchanges, and the people-to-people relationships that have been developed. For me, one of the most impactful things is to hear from Bahrainis, Emiratis, and Moroccans about their first experience visiting Israel, and from Israelis about their first experience visiting these countries. Today, we will hear from a dear friend of mine, Sheikh Abdulla Al-Khalifa from Bahrain, about his recent experience. A couple of weeks ago, Sheikh Abdullah and I caught up in Bahrain, and his excitement was palpable. We sat for hours talking about his trip, the impact it had on him, and how it has further inspired him to be part of the change taking place in our region. Some of you may have heard him speak at the recent AGJC Global Forum. His words really struck me when he said, "After too many decades without peace, the next generation of Middle East leaders now has the power to overcome the long-standing narratives that have kept our region apart. Arabs and Israelis, Muslims and Jews can finally set aside their differences and unite in their resolve to find a way forward and not allow the wars of our past to determine the future of our region." Thank you, Sheikh Abdullah, for speaking with us today about your experience. And as always, the AGJC continues to build and enhance Jewish life in the region. If we can be a resource to you or anybody who you know, please reach out to us on Twitter @GulfJewish or visit our website, www.gulfjewish.org. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you'll join us next week as well. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom from the UAE.
Thanks so much, Ariella. Echoing wishes of Mazel Tov to Benjy, and looking forward to hearing what Sheikh Abdullah has to share with us in a short while. Now to light Shabbat candles, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Jennifer, aka my mum. So all the way from Manchester, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jake. It's a pleasure once more to be joining you here from a sunny Manchester today. Can't often say that. So I'll now light the candles. Baruch atah Hashem, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'chadlikneh shel Shabbos. Amen. Good Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom.
Amen. Good Shabbos, as we say at home, and Shabbat Shalom, depending on which way you go. Now for Yedid Nefesh and Lechadodi with Isaac.
Yedid Nefesh Avarachaman Meshoch Abdecha El Retzonecha Yarutz Abdecha Kemo Hayal Yishtachave Mul Adarecha Ki Erev Lo Yedidutecha Minof Etzuf Vechol Ta'am Ador Nae Zifa Olam Nafshi Cholat Ahavatecha Ana Elana Refana La Beharot La Noam Zivach Az Titchazek ותתרפא והייתה לך שמחת עולם ותיק ימונה רחמך וחוסנה על בן אהובך כי זה כמה נחשוף ונחשפתי לראות בתפארת עוזך, אנא אלי מחמד ליבי, חוסנה ואל תתעלם, היגע להנה ופרוס חביבי עלי את סוכת שלומך, תאיר ארץ מכבודך, נגילה ונשמחה בך, מהר אהוב כי בא מועד, וכונני כי מעולם. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. שמור וזכור בדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל המיוחד. אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשם ולתפארת ולתהילה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. מקדש מלך עיר מלוכה, קומי צאי מתוך אפיך, רהב לך שבט בעמק הבכה, והוא יחמול עלייך חמלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. ימין ושמאל תפרוצי, ואת אדוני תעריצי. על יעד איש בן פרצי, ונשמחה ונגילה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. בואי בשלום עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצהולה. תוך אמונה עם סגולה, בואי כלה. תוך אמונה עם סגולה, בואי כלה שבת מלכתה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה.
Thank you, Isaac. Beautiful. To introduce our guest speaker for the week, over to Benjy.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. So it is my esteemed honor to be able to welcome my friend, Sheikh Abdulla Al-Khalifa, to the call today. Abdullah, I'll give a semi-formal overview of your bio. You're the third secretary within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And over your career, you've covered issues related to the Americas, Pacific affairs, human rights, and counterterrorism. You also have quite a lot of experience in administrative and consular affairs. Currently, Sheikh Abdullah is serving as the Chief of Communications at the Higher Education Council in Bahrain. I know a few weeks ago we heard from Sheikh Rania about her work there. But Abdullah has been instrumental, and I have a lot of firsthand experience in this, in your ability to create partnerships, plan international and local meetings, manage public relations, and really try to find a way to bolster and create new connections between Bahraini higher education institutions with with surrounding institutions within the region and in the US as well. Sheikh Abdullah has also served on the country's anti-COVID task force, in their war room, in the office of the first deputy prime minister. He's currently enrolled in the King Hamad Faith and Leadership Fellowship Program at the King Hamad Global Center for Peaceful Coexistence. Sheikh Abdullah has earned a master's degree in international relations at the London School of Economics and holds a bachelor degree in international relations from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. But I would say more important than that, Sheikh Abdullah, I consider you a incredibly close personal friend. One where, I think over the years, it's really been amazing to track our progress. I think we first met in 2019, met again after the pandemic in 2021, and then have been absolutely privileged to further our relationship, even more so in 2022. Just to say that Riva Gorelik and I were with Sheikh Abdullah when he came to Israel, came on AGJC Project Interchange trip. And these last 2 weeks of mine particularly have put a lot of things in perspective. And there is a lot of terrible news out there, including today's news with the assassination of Prime Minister Abadie. And it's hard to sometimes filter those terrible things out. But particularly when we focus on the Abraham Accords, when we focus on the Jewish communities throughout the Gulf, really being able to see the growth and the potential, not only on the government, but really with individuals. That's where the power is, and that's where the importance of this shift is taking place. And for that reason, Sheikh Abdullah, I've been absolutely honored to be able to learn from you, to be able to call myself your friend. And thank you so much for the opportunity to introduce you and for being on this call. So I turn it over to you.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you so much, Benjy, for your kind words. Honestly, the honor and privilege is mine, both to speak here and to be a part of that wider AGJC Project Interchange family. I really, before I could begin talking about my trip and my experience at Israel and the whole PI experience, really, I just wanted to preface this by thanking Benjy and Riva, who said she might be able to make it here, but I'm not sure if she is. And really the whole of the AGJC for sponsoring that really historic trip back in March. For myself and my colleagues, both from Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates and Morocco, it was eye-opening and, dare I say, life-changing. I have a lot to say, and I know I only have 10 minutes, so I'll try to draw or highlight rather some of the let's call them landmark moments or moments that stood out to me. So right off the bat, and I mentioned this all the time, when Ariella and I were speaking a few weeks ago, I mentioned this to her as well, but excuse me. One of the most, like the biggest takeaways I took from Israeli culture, having been there, was just, and it's, I've described it as a breath of fresh air because it is, to the culture in the region, but it's this concept of techlos, or getting straight to the point, and that was something that they'd always say when we'd meet, and even today, like when a couple of weeks ago when Ariella and I were talking about this, too much techlos can come off as a bit rude, but in a part of the world where we tend to do a lot of peacocking and there's a lot of protocol, it tends to delay things, and it's in no one's benefit. So having a Middle Eastern country that is, okay, it's Mediterranean, and Mediterranean cultures tend to be very laid back, but at the end of the day, they're still Middle Eastern, have this, an integral part of their culture. It just, it speaks to the value that this relationship can provide the rest of us in terms of learning how to, not dwell on pleasantries and maybe, pick up the pace when it comes to meetings, at least, or any formal setting. So that was one big takeaway from my trip in Israel. Another thing that I like to mention is the hospitality, the sense of Eastern hospitality that we received while we were in, all across the country. Really, we've been to Tel Aviv. We went all the way down to the to Kibbutz Kfar Aza, which is in the Negev region. All the way north to not the Galilee, but by Haifa and a Druze village just in that area, and of course Jerusalem. And throughout, like, Israel's as you know, as our tour guide, who I'll come to him in a moment, Yossi, he really grew on us by the end of the trip, and we felt as though, he became a member of our family, almost the father figure that the group needed. And then our elder siblings or our guides were Riva and Benjy, but when we were at the Druze village, for instance, it felt it really felt like we were among friends and family. We also felt that or had a similar experience in Jerusalem when we were at the home having Shabbat dinner at a Reformed Jewish couple, a Reformed Jewish American Israeli couple's household, and also when we were at the household, it was a bit of an artsy night, but at the household of a Moroccan Israeli couple. Netta is the name of the singer, and I can't recall her husband's name, but no, she is not Eurovision Netta, but she is equally famous. I'm not a very artsy person myself, but I mean, I digress. It was wonderful. And two, I mentioned the Druze village, and I mentioned the Moroccan night with Netta and her husband. But two things struck out. We met, a member of our delegation from the Emirati side, his Hebrew teacher lived a couple of minutes away, I believe. It couldn't be more than an hour away from the Druze village, and he had told her that that he was going to be in this village, and there she was while we were having lunch. She came in, just knocked on the door, said hello. They welcomed her, and it was so surreal. We were like, do they happen to know her? What's going on here? I mean, how could this this stranger essentially come into the house? We've only just met these people, and it just spoke to the whole vibe that we got in Israel of hospitality and everyone being welcome to one another. And something very similar happened at the Moroccan couple's household as well, where a professor Nir Bombs, who works at Tel Aviv University, he also came in, and he knows another member of the delegation, Nawaf Sayed, who's Bahraini, and they met here in Bahrain a couple of months ago, maybe a year ago even. But when he came in again, it was like I didn't think that he'd know the couple, but I mean, they welcomed him and he spent the night with us, and then we went and had dinner together. And it was again, it just spoke to, because in Bahrain, for instance, we have this idea that and it's sort of become anachronistic, unfortunately, over the years, but this was very much true back in the day, where neighbors would be able to just walk into each other's houses seamlessly, and the community, the bonds between members of the community was just so strong that no one would doubt or think of the other person as maybe potentially being a thief or an intruder or what have you. That is no longer the case, I'm afraid. Maybe in some parts of the country it is, but the impression I got from Israel was that is still very much the case. And for a country that is, it's much larger than Bahrain, it's a small country, and Yossi keeps saying that, or he kept saying that during the trip. But to have that sort of dynamic, it's really, really special, and it speaks to the sort of welcoming nature of the people in Israel. We also had a similar experience at one of the households, or sorry, one of the villages just outside of Jerusalem, Abu Ghosh, I believe its name was, in an Arab Israeli village. We went to the household of a former mayor, and again, it was very similar. And we had this is something. This is something we spoke about a lot more towards the end of the trip, but we had candid conversations about what it meant to be an Israeli. And although it might have been different for the Reform couple, for the Moroccan couple, for the Druze, for the villagers, the Arab Israeli mayor and his family and his household, they all had a common theme, or there was a thread that linked all those different visions of Israel and Israeli identity together, and that was that, well, we love this country, it treats us fairly, we feel as though we might have different perspectives of what, and I don't want to get much into the politics, but this also, because we met with members of Labor, we met with former minister in Bibi Netanyahu's cabinet, and again, it also echoed the same sort of sentiment where we're all in this together despite our, and I believe this was a well, he's no longer, he's the outgoing Israeli prime minister, or is it Lapid who said this? Well, there was this vision of a sort of a broad tent, Israel as a broad tent, of different cultures, identities, and perspectives. And that really was the impression we got, that, at the end of the day, we're all still part of that tent. That's as far as Israel on its own is concerned. So that was very eye-opening for me. As far as, their own views regarding the Abraham Accords were concerned, they were as excited as we are. And there was a lot to say, and I mentioned this to Benjy, too little time to cover everything, but that was the point of PI, for us to be able to test the waters with different stakeholders in industry, politics, civil society, medicine. Another thing that I need to mention is, so I am familiar, or I've become familiar with the concept of Tikkun Olam in Judaism, and Tikkun Olam was something else that I felt had its place very much prominently in all the different institutions and different segments of Israeli socio-political life that we had the privilege of visiting. So take, for instance, the Save a Child's Heart Foundation. I had no idea. I had known, for instance, before, and Ariella and I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago as well. I had known, for instance, that during the Syrian civil war, that a lot of the combatants were treated by, especially if it was on the border, the Golan Heights, would be treated by the IDF or by Israeli hospitals. But I didn't know about the immense, like the whole charity scene in Israel, and really Save a Child's Heart was such an eye-opener in the sense that this is a country in the Middle East. They would fly over people from as far as Senegal and sub-Saharan Africa, if there was a case, if they had come to know that there was a case of a poor family that needed that their child needed heart surgery, or any sort of that they're suffering from any sort of heart-related illness. So really, it was. I mean, I think I've gone over time, but really the whole experience that we had, I think was very fruitful for the Accords, and I think this is just the beginning, the first step in a larger exchange, for not only for PI itself, but generally, people-to-people relations is what's going to not only make sure that the Accords are fruitful, but it's going to take things, float things to new heights, because the more people meet one another, like regular people. I know I'm a sheikh. I can't really say I'm regular, but the point is, regardless of who I am in society, what job I work at, the individuals I met in Israel, I met as Abdullah, and they had met me as, say for instance, Yossi, our tour guide. Average people who otherwise, without the Accords, would never have come into contact with one another, and seeing more of this, having more investments, more academic partnerships, more bridges being built will really integrate Israel in the region and bring the region to Israel, because Israel is a world of its own. I'm not sure if I'm at liberty to discuss this, but there is something exciting that Benjy, Reva, and I are working on regarding PI for this upcoming second anniversary of Bahrain joining the Accords. If that works out well, it could be a template, much like how PI for me and my colleagues was a template for more of these people-to-people interactions to take place, and to take place more regularly. So really, that was the gist of my experience in Israel, and thank you all for having me.
Sheikh Abdullah, to cut to the tachlis, it's so moving to hear about your experience in Israel, particularly how warmly welcomed you were. As I know, and I've personally experienced here in the Gulf, that many Jews and Israelis really feel that welcoming nature from Arab culture and our local friends and neighbors here. So it's incredibly moving and meaningful to hear about your experience. And hopefully I'll be able to come and experience that in Bahrain very soon. And I think it speaks to the nature of the Abraham Accords, which is to go deep, which is not to be just surface level and pleasantries. I'm British, so for me, pleasantries come very naturally. But as you say, the Abraham Accords, we really feel it's about going deep, and establishing those meaningful relationships is incredibly important and exciting. And we're all looking forward to what's coming next. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you. It was my honor.
Rabbi Abadie, please.
Thank you, Jake, and thank you, Sheikh Abdullah, for your words, telling us about your experience in your trip in Israel and what you're doing. It is truly inspiring to see when people work together, they get to know each other, they get to embrace each other, support each other, and I think that's the only alternative to the past, is a brighter future of working together, coexistence, living together, and for the benefit of humankind in general. Thank you again for your words. We all have heard the statement that sometimes we take things for granted. We do. Unfortunately, we do take things for granted sometimes, and we do not appreciate what we have until we don't have it. And sometimes when we take things for granted, we think that we are entitled to have what we're having. And once we don't have it, we of course feel upset, uncomfortable, as though it is something that we deserve, as though it's something that it belongs to us, so to speak, as though nobody can take it away from us. And I'm sure all of us here, we could remember of an occasion that we took things for granted until we realized that they don't belong to us. Or we have seen it in other people, that people take things for granted. They might take our friendship for granted. They might take our service for granted. They might take our support for granted. And then we come to realize that we can never take things for granted. Every day that we have is a gift from God. Every good thing that we have is a gift from God. And even everything that is bad that happens to us. As our sages say, that we ought to thank the Almighty for good and bad, because even the bad thing, those bad things might be bad in relative to what we think is right, is good, and is bad. But in the ultimate view, in a sense, is something bad. How many times we experience what we call a bad experience, a bad thing that happened to us, and then a day, a week, sometimes years later, we come to the realization that indeed that was not a bad thing, that was a very good thing. And because of that thing, we are where we are now, better and happier, and so on and so forth. I'm sure we all have had those experiences. The parasha this week, Parashat Hukat, it's that parasha that really jumps from the second year of the Israelites' sojourn in the desert to the 40th year. It's a 38 years that, in a sense, pass with less than one paragraph in the parasha of this week, of this Shabbat. And so we are told that suddenly the flock, the people, started complaining that there's no more water, that they need water. And they start complaining, why did you take us out of Egypt? And so we could die here in the desert. We need water. We need to even give to our flock to drink. And so you took us out of Egypt to a place as bad as this, which was the desert, of course, that there is no place to plant, there is no place, there are no figs, there's no vine, there's no pomegranate, there's no water, there's nothing. Again, mind you, this is no longer the old generation that complained almost all the time. It is the new generation. It is that generation that is supposed to enter into the land of Israel and conquer it. It is that generation that is supposed to be no longer have a slave mentality, no longer feel that they are that the whole world owes them, or that they feel that they need to have their needs taken care of. It's that new generation that God told Moses, it is with that new generation that you'll be able to conquer the land and enter Israel. And yet we see for the first time that they complained about water. And so our sages tell us that what happened is that they used to have a well that miraculously traveled with them. And that well was in honor of Miriam, the sister of Moses, who saved him. And because of her honor, that well existed. The moment she passed away, that well disappeared, and there was no longer water so readily available. And so the people complained. Now, of course, we can agree that if a person is very thirsty, that water is, after oxygen, water is the second most important element for life, to live. And if that didn't exist, how could they live? And in a sense, on one hand, they're right to complain that they need water. What wasn't right is not that they complained that they needed water. What wasn't right is, again, their sense or their feeling of lack of faith that God is there to protect them, that God is there to take care of their needs, that God would not take them out in the desert so they could die in thirst, especially after almost 40 years, after 39 years, and they're ready and a few months later to enter the land of Israel. And they're really going to think that God now wanted them to die in the desert? Of course not. But that was the problem. It's not that they complained about the water, is that they demonstrated a lack of faith that God will take care of that need of them. Obviously he will, but they had that lack of faith. And secondly, that they took things for granted by saying, what? We took the well for granted for 40 years. It should be there. And maybe the reason that the well no longer existed is for them to realize that they shouldn't take things for granted. And I think that's the lesson of our parasha, that in life we take many things for granted on a day-to-day basis usually, and sometimes for a longer time. But we have to come to the realization that not everything is for granted. Some things can disappear in the spare of a second, and we have to appreciate what we have. We have to thank the Almighty for what He has given us, and always have that faith that if He put us in this world, He will take care of us. Of course, we have to do our best. We have to be mishtadel, as we say in Hebrew. We have to try, and we have to do what's incumbent upon us, and we let God to do what's incumbent upon Him to do. Have faith and don't take things for granted. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you, Rabbi Abadie, so much. Now we go back to you to read an excerpt from this week's parsha in Hebrew, and Tal is very kindly going to read an English translation for us.
Right, so I will be actually reading that portion that I spoke about. It's chapter 20 of Numbers, the book of Numbers, verse 1 to verse 13, that speaks exactly about this episode. ויבואו בני ישראל כל העדה מתפרסים בחודש הראשון וישב העם בקדש ותמות שם מרים ותיקבר שם ולא היה מים לעדה ויקהלו על משה ועל אהרון וירב העם עם משה ויאמרו לאמור ולו גבענו בגבענו לפני אדוני ולמה הבאתם את קהל אדוני אל המדבר הזה למות שם אנחנו ובעירנו ולמה העליתונו ממצרים להביא אותנו אל המקום הרע הזה לא מקום זרע ותאנה ורפן ורימון ומים אין לשתות ויבוא משה ואהרון מפני הקהל אל פתח אוהל מועד ויפלו על פניהם וירא כבוד אדוני עליהם וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור קח את המטה והקל את העדה אתה ואהרון אחיך ודברתם אל הסלע לעיניהם ונתן מימיו והוסת להם מים מן הסלע והשקית את העדה את בעירם ויקח משה את המטה מלפני אדוני כאשר צבאו ויקהילו משה ואהרון את הקהל אל פני הסלע ויאמר להם שמעונה המורים מן הסלע הזה נושא לכם מים וירם משה את ידו ויח את הסלע במטהו פעמיים ויסעו מים רבים ותשת העדה ובעירם ויאמר אדוני אל משה ואל אהרון יען לא האמנתם בי להקדישני לעיני בני ישראל לכן לא תביאו את הקהל הזה אל הארץ אשר נתתי להם המה ממריבה אשר רבו בני ישראל את אדוני ויקדש בה.
Met. Thank you, Rabbi Abadie. Tal, please.
The Israelites arrived in Abadie at the wilderness of Tzin on the first new moon, and the people stayed at Kadesh. Miriam died there and was buried there. The community was without water, and they joined against Moshe and Aaron. The people quarreled with Moshe, saying, "If only we had perished when our brothers perished at the instance of Adonai. Why have you brought Adonai's congregation to the wilderness for us and our beasts to die there? Why did you make us leave Egypt to bring us to the wretched place, a place with no grain or figs or vines or pomegranates? There is not even water to drink. Moshe and Aaron came away from the congregation to the entrance of the tent of the meeting and fell on their faces. The presence of Adonai appeared to them. And Adonai spoke to Moshe, saying, you and your brother Aaron take the rod and assemble the community, and therefore their very eyes order the rock to yield its water. Thus you shall produce water for them from the rock and provide drink for the congregation and their beasts. Moshe took the rod from before Adonai as he had been commanded. Moshe and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock. And he said to them, listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you out of the rock? And Moshe raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod. Out came copious water, and the community and their beasts drank. But Adonai said to Moshe and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity, in the sight of the Israelite people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation into the land that I have given them. There are the waters of Meribah, meaning that the Israelites quarreled with Adonai, whose sanctity was affirmed through them. From Kadesh, Moshe sent messengers to the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel, you know all the hardship that has befallen us, that our ancestors went down to Egypt, that we dwelt in Egypt a long time, and that the Egyptians dealt harshly with us and our ancestors. We cried to Adonai, who heard our plea, sending a messenger who freed us from Egypt. Now we are in Kadesh, the town on the border of your territory. Allow us then to cross your country. We will not pass through fields or vineyards. We will not drink water from wells. We will follow the king's highway, turning off neither to the right nor the left until we have crossed your territory. But Edom answered him, you shall not pass through us, else we will go out against you with the sword. We will keep to the beaten track. The Israelites said to them, and if we or our cattle drink your water, we will pay for it. We ask only for passage on foot. It is but a small matter. But they replied, you shall not pass through. And Edom went out against them in a heavy force, strongly armed. So Edom would not let Israel cross their territory, and Israel turned away from them. Setting out from Kadesh, the Israelites arrived in Abadie at Mount Hod. Mount Hod, on the boundary of the land of Edom, Adonai said to Moshe and Aaron, let Aaron be gathered to his kin. He is not to enter the land that I have assigned to the Israelite people, because you disobeyed my command about the waters of Meribah. Take Aaron and his son Elazar and bring them up to Mount Hod. Strip Aaron of his vestments and put them on his son Elazar. There Aaron shall be gathered unto the dead. Moshe did as Adonai commanded. They ascended Mount Hod in the sight of the whole community. Moshe stripped Aaron.
I think we've just gone past the section that Rabbi Abadie read, but
we did.
Thank you so much for reading.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to the prayer for peace with Ariella.
Thank you, Jake. So this is the prayer for peace adapted from Rabbi Nachman ben Fega. Lord of peace, divine ruler, to whom peace belongs, master of peace, creator of all things, may it be your will to put an end to war and bloodshed on earth and to spread a great and wonderful peace over the whole world. Help us and save us all, and let us cling tightly to the virtue of peace. Let there be a truly great peace between every person and their fellow, and let there be no discord between people, even in their hearts. Let us never shame any person on earth, great or small. May it be granted unto us to fulfill thy commandment, to love thy neighbor as thyself, with all our hearts and souls and bodies and possessions. God, who is peace, bless us with peace.
Amen. Thanks, Ariella. Now we turn to the prayer for the GCC countries with Rose.
Thank you. Thank you for the prayers and the special Bahraini message. May he who gives salvation to kings and dominion to princes, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, who delivers his servant David from the evil sword, who makes a way in the sea and a path through the mighty waters, bless and protect, guard and help exalt, magnify, and uplift His Majesty the King of Saudi Arabia, His Majesty the King of Bahrain, His Majesty the Sultan of Oman, His Highness the President of the United Arab Emirates, His Highness the Emir of Kuwait, His Highness the Emir of Qatar, and all their crown princes. And may the Supreme King of Kings in His mercy put a spirit of wisdom and understanding into their hearts and the hearts of all their counselors and officials to deal kindly with us, the house of Jacob, and all the people of this land. Be their shelter and stronghold, and let them not falter. In their days and in ours, may these lands be blessed with stability, prosperity, and peace. May this be His will, and let us say Amen.
Amen.
Shalom.
Thank you so much, Rose. And to sing us out with Shalom Aleichem, back to Isaac.
שלום עליכם מלאכי השרת מלאכי עליון ממלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא בואכם לשלום מלאכי השלום מלאכי עליון ממלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא ברכוני לשלום מלאכי השלום מלאכי עליון ממלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא בשבתכם לשלום מלאכי השלום מלאכי עליון ממלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא בשאתכם לשלום מלאכי השלום מלאכי עליון ממלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Isaac. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Shabbat Shalom. See you
Shabbat
next
Shalom,
week.
everyone.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.